I'm thinking about my experience with it. That first 6 months, and honestly, the first year, but really in that first 6 months, I put
Yeah.
so much pressure on myself to just
Mhm.
like, it's been 6 months. Why aren't I okay with this yet? And I mean, it
Right.
was a sudden death. Like, of course, I'm
Mm,
not okay with it. But
right.
I think in what you're saying, there's no charted path.
Yeah.
There was nobody to hand me a picture of myself 2 years from now and say, look, you are going to be okay.
Right.
So you just need to just give yourself some time now because you will get there. I think there's this fear that if I don't do it right this second, I'm never going to be okay. And I need to get my shit together right now.
Yes, yes, which is so unnecessary, right?
Mhm.
And I always try to lean back on like, what would you tell your best friend? Because we can be so much more compassionate sometimes with those that we love than with ourselves. Like, self-compassion wasn't even in my vocabulary back then. And neither was kind of how broadly now we speak about grief and mental health. We're looking back at like 19 years ago. So it was very different. I feel like it was very, even way more uncomfortable for people then. And I felt this sense of like discomfort and how do I bring it up? And when don't I? And so it was just like it that added to the increasing unchartedness, right? Like
Yeah.
how do I navigate this new world as a young widow? And it did cause confusion. And I did put a lot of, I think, pressure on myself. And yeah, I would just hope that, like you were saying, that people had that self-reflection to be like, hey, just chill out.
It's
This is a
so
lot.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
hard.
It is hard. It is hard. And there's sometimes like familial pressure or work pressure. Sometimes we just feel pressure from different
Or
aspects of
sometimes
our.
none of that pressure actually exists, but you think
Yes,
it does. You think
yes,
people
so
are looking
true.
at you differently. You think you're going to get fired if you don't
So
perform a certain way.
true.
You think all of these things and they're not
Absolutely.
real. It's your own self
Yeah.
again.
100%. Yeah, definitely. It can be all these perceptions of what we think, right? And it's not actually not grounded in like, let's test if this is true. So yes, yes, yes to all of that. And yes to more time and more compassion across the board if you're going through it, to just like you were saying, John, like you will be okay. And do what you need, and take the space and the time that you need, and the support is there, because I think more
Yeah.
than I sometimes we even realize, definitely.
Yeah. What came next for you?
So I was in my graduate program then, and I had a great advisor who I was having a hard time like getting back into like finishing up my PhD program. And she recommended, well, why don't you do something around grief? And so I started teaching these courses at the time I was doing sociology, on the sociology of death and dying. And that just like dove me into like cross-cultural look on death and dying, and,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of
Mm.
like a research nerd, so I loved learning about different ways of looking at death and grieving, and that was really cathartic for me. I got to teach like these big large lecture halls with like 300 people like multiple times, and it really helped me to just broaden my perspective of, yes, obviously death is very hard and really difficult for the people left behind, and there can also be different ways of looking at it, and different cultures look at it differently and celebrate it differently. So that kind of opened up my world a bit to just have a broader perspective on, well, could I, still have a relationship with my husband at the time is David? Like, are there different ways to connect? How can I keep his memory alive here? And so it really kind of opened me up more. And that's when, after I finished my graduate program, I kind of took a more traditional route. I was teaching for a while, and grief was kind of like there, and people would always come to me, if they lost a loved one or if it came up. And I slowly started like coaching around that kind of on the side, and until I did it more full time. My brother died 4 years ago, so that was 15 years after David. So there was definitely a gap there. And it was interesting to experience, like you were saying, grief is so different with every relationship. And this was my brother now. My brother and I are like so close. I mean, I love my brother so, so much. And so huge, devastating loss. But I feel like I had so much experience now
Mhm.
around grief and loss and connection. And so it was a very different experience. Like I definitely still obviously grieved him, and continue to, especially around holidays and milestones and things. But it was very different in the sense that I felt kind of this renewed sense that I knew that our love and relationship didn't have to die. And I know for some people that was very like, and it still can be, depending, everyone kind of will embrace that or not embrace that differently. But for me, it just felt viscerally real. Like I
I just viscerally felt that in my gut
Oh,
when you
I
said
love
that, like in the best way possible,
that.
because you're right. It doesn't end the love. And
Yes.
that is one of the important lessons to learn from grief. And thank you for bringing that here, because I think that is so true. And you saying this makes me reflect on some of the losses I've had since my dad. While they are still very hard, I do definitely look at them differently than
Mm,
I did his, when it was like that first real jarring experience
yeah,
with death. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I almost was like grateful in a way of like, oh, okay, I've been through this. I know it's going to like, I almost like knew what to expect. Like I knew I was just going to be ridiculously sad for a while because it's devastating. And he's my
Hmm.
younger brother and it wasn't expected. And I knew now I needed to give myself that space and that that was okay. That it's, of course, you're going to like mourn this huge significant person in your life. And once I did that, and now I knew how to kind of be with my feelings more and sit with them and like not be as scared of like this deep, dark sadness and really allow myself that space, then I could open up avenues to connect with him more and to just be more open to it. So I just felt more open. I felt more free to feel, and it really created a very different experience. And I think in having those, that's what I hope to impart or get to share with people, that grief is so hard. And like you were saying, the love doesn't end. And
Hmm.
it almost like opens you up to this world that unless you've experienced it, you can't really like begin to understand. But it's
Yeah.
a beautiful world and this other beautiful way to have an ongoing relationship if you're open to it.
There is an appreciation for life after
Mhm.
experiencing a death that cannot be taught.
Oh yeah, 1000%. Absolutely.